Well, for more on what to expect as these talks continue, our Europe editor, Catherine Nicholson, is standing by in Brussels. Good afternoon, Catherine. So European leaders will continue discussing their dependence on Russian energy today. And despite a significant show of unity thus far, as we've seen, the expectation is still that these talks are likely to be quite tough.
Absolutely, yes. These questions of energy are just so fundamental to European economies. There are some economies like Germany, the biggest economy in the EU, which is so heavily dependent on Russian gas particularly, but also its oil. And that's just one of the countries that has that high dependency. So quite welcome news from Joe Biden and Ursula von der Leyen earlier today, as we just heard about the liquefied natural gas shipments from the US to the EU increasing. But that is not going to solve this story at all. And another aspect of it is the fact that there are just very high energy prices right now, partly that we're already existing in the market, but massively exacerbated by the war in Ukraine and by the EU's sanctions. And this is where we think that the talks are really going to get quite testy between the EU's 27 leaders. We're seeing, at a time when Europeans are trying to recover from the COVID pandemic, the impact that had on the economies, they're also trying to transition to greener, cleaner energies, which comes with obvious costs as well. And we're seeing essentially two camps emerging inside the European Union. Interventionists, those who want the European Union as a bloc to intervene in the energy markets, and those who are saying, there's not really a silver bullet, we need a more hands-off approach. The interventionists led by Spain, by the Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, who has had big protests in his country over the high energy costs that people are facing. I won't get into too much of the detail, but it's to do with decoupling the electricity price from the gas price. That's the nub of what Pedro Sanchez is arguing right now. But then we've got big players like Germany, but also the Netherlands, one of the other big economies in the EU, which is saying, we really can't be having this intervention. It might bring some short-term relief, but it's really not going to fix things and could, in fact, cause longer-term problems and undermine efforts as well to have that transition towards more renewable production. So diplomatic sources are quoted as saying that Spain's Prime Minister Sanchez is prepared to veto the conclusions of the entire summit if he doesn't get some leeway from the hands-off camp. And so it really makes quite a recipe for very fiery talks about this very essential subject for European economies.
Sounds like some cracks in that unity are starting to show, Catherine. So aside from the issues related to the war in Ukraine, then, the leaders have several other big topics to discuss and not much time to do so, it would seem.
Not at all. This summit already started late yesterday, later than scheduled. Of course, there were those huge meetings earlier in the day at NATO and at the G7, and those running over had a knock-on effect here on the European summit. There's a great number of issues on the agenda here that are going to really have to be rushed through today, even if they do overrun as we expect. For example, the EU's long-term security and defence strategy, which has been brought into such sharp focus, of course, by what's going on in Ukraine. Just a reminder to our viewers, not every single EU member state is a member of NATO, and the EU is looking at what kind of defence and security strategy should it be having, can it be having, what can it finance as a bloc, and we're going to be interested to see what comes out of that today, because it's really quite new ground for the EU, an area where they're really trying to scramble and accelerate their decision making. A couple of other issues, broader economic issues, including strengthening the European Union's transition towards green economies and its digital transition. The state of the COVID pandemic, an instrument as well for future pandemic prevention that the EU is working on with the World Health Organization, and also the not inconsiderable issue of the EU's foreign relations, particular focus at the moment on Bosnia-Herzegovina, where there's quite a degree of instability and a large amount of Russian intervention, and also the EU's relations with China, which, as we know, is a very important player in the situation regarding Russia and Ukraine. And there is a virtual leaders meeting between EU leaders and Chinese leaders planned for next Friday. And it's absolutely vital that the EU's 27 member state leaders get on the same page today about what they want to come out of that meeting in a week's time. So a lot being rushed through on this second day of this summit.
A lot indeed, Catherine. We'll see as we await the talks to start what will come out of it. Catherine Nicholson, thank you very much for that update from Brussels.